has led liberal economists to neglect the importance of security, food security, personal security, national security. Our new liberal economics can't afford to repeat those mistakes. It can't be about going back to the world as it was, before Trump, before COVID, before Brexit, before the crash. What we need is liberal economics 2.0, retaining all that work so brilliantly in version 1, but recognising its errors and correcting them too. Grasping the new realities of our changing world, from AI to climate change to demographic trends that make the fiscal outlook even more challenging. From the need to increase defence spending to the strength of new economic superpowers like China and India. The era of interdependence is over. We need cooperation, but not dependence. But even in this new world, some old truths remain. Some are even truer than before, like the importance of trade. Trade was how Victorian liberals overturned protectionism imposed by the Tories to usher in a period of free trade and growth. We champion free trade because it enlarges individual freedom. As one of my predecessors as Liberal leader put it, free trade gives the freest play to individual energy and initiative and character, and the largest liberty both to producer and consumer. And of course, free trade brings growth and lowers the cost of living. That is why we opposed the Conservatives' Brexit deal, the biggest and most destructive act of protectionism in our lifetime. It's why Liberal Democrats have pressed for a new, bespoke UK-EU customs union. Why you're pressing Labour to go well beyond its timid reset with Europe and tear down Tory trade barriers as quickly as possible, to free British business from reels of costly red tape and bring down prices in our shops. And it's why Liberal Democrats are arguing for a new economic coalition of the willing, for more free trade, not just with Europe, but with Commonwealth allies and Asian allies too. The anti-free trade politics of Donald Trump have to be taken on. We can't let the tariff man's bullying approach to trade and geopolitics succeed. We know where that ends. That's why appeasing the White House isn't smart. Remember, Donald Trump isn't forever. And as ordinary Americans suffer the cost of his idiocy, the tide will turn. Let the Conservatives and Nigel Farage champion Trump. We Liberal Democrats will champion Britain and defend free trade so hard won by those 19th century liberals. The party of trade, and as liberals we are also the party of people, because underpinning our vision for the economy is an understanding of what the economy really is. It isn't just a series of abstract percentages and meaningless slogans. We understand that when you strip everything else away, an economy is its people. So growing the economy means getting the right people with the right skills in the right jobs. That starts with a new approach to education and training, which across the UK has got narrower and narrower when the rest of the world has got broader. I'm proud that my local university, Kingston, is reversing that trend with what it calls its Future Skills Programme, properly researched, talking to business, and 5 years in implementation. Now, every undergraduate, whatever they are studying, now also studies everything from creative problem solving to digital competency and artificial intelligence, from empathy to resilience, from adaptability to being enterprising. Skills they need, and skills businesses say they want. That's the kind of education I want for our young people, and indeed anyone else who wants it later in life. And because the economy is about people, I believe that means to get growth, to boost productivity, we need to focus far more on incentives. We need to build an incentive economy. an economy that gets the incentives right to motivate people, to encourage people, to reward people who do their bit and play by the rules, and to stop people who break the rules. In government, Liberal Democrats focused on getting the incentives right, introducing the pupil premium, an incentive for schools to take more of the most disadvantaged children and focus on them. Raising the personal income tax allowance by £4,000, taking the lowest paid out of income tax, incentivising work for everyone, but especially the less well off. So the Liberal Democrat record shows we've long been the party of incentives, and so many of our big ideas today are about how we encourage people to do the right thing. When it comes to backing Britain's small and growing businesses, for example, the startups and scale-ups, the entrepreneurs and the self-employed, they are the engines of our economy, the beating heart of local communities, but they have been so let down in recent years. Just remember how the Conservative government shamefully excluded over 1 million self-employed people from financial support during COVID, leaving only us, the Liberal Democrats, to stand up for them in Parliament. Because we prioritise growth, we have long championed the self-employed and the small business owners. For them too, it's about government getting the incentives right. That's why we'd abolish the unfair system of business rates and replace it with a better commercial landowner levy to increase the incentive to invest and grow. It's why we're opposing Labour's misguided job tax and its unfair tax raid on family farms and other family businesses. It's why I've proposed the idea of employment in a box, to force every government department, especially Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, to come together to make the UK the easiest place in the world for a business to take on its first employees. Because we need to stop holding back small firms that want to grow and free them, encourage them to do so. And getting the incentives right also means getting rid of the wrong incentives. So a ban on the bonuses for water company CEOs who keep polluting our rivers and seas, and fines if they don't stop, fits with my vision of an incentive economy. We've got to stop rewarding failure. And of course, we need to think totally afresh about how we incentivise more people into work. With our focus on care and carers, Liberal Democrats have argued for a special higher minimum wage for care workers, £2 an hour higher than the national minimum wage, to incentivise more people into the care sector. And for family carers, where millions have given up work to look after their loved ones and millions more have had to reduce their hours, we have argued for an overhaul of the crazy carers allowance system so it properly supports carers and enables them to juggle work and care instead of penalising them for taking on more hours of work. Getting the incentives right. That inevitably takes us to the unsustainable welfare bill and the government's shambolic attempt to reform welfare. Cutting personal independence payments from disabled people and their carers was indefensible, and it's right those plans were dropped. But what got lost in the government's desperation to make the sums add up was an important truth. We need to get more people who aren't working into work. It's better for their dignity, it's better for their families, it's better for the economy. The problem is, the government's proposed solution would have made the problem worse, taking away the very support that enables many disabled people to work at all. What we need to do, and what our party will always champion, is to put in place the flexibility, the security, the support people need in order to work. Working from home, if that's what their condition requires. Part-time, if that's all they can manage. Helping employers to make whatever reasonable adjustments their workers need. Again, it comes back to liberal values, seeing people as individuals and treating them fairly. It's what makes me so angry about the PIP assessment process. the impenetrable forms that show no comprehension of what life is like for disabled people or their carers, the dehumanizing nature of it all, trying to turn everyone into a box to be ticked or crossed, not an individual to be engaged with and understood. Let me give you a really significant example of this. Before the pandemic, 83% of PIP assessments were done face-to-face. There were often problems with such face-to-face assessments, no doubt about it, but at least they happened. Then during lockdown, they understandably switched to being done on the phone or by video. But when the pandemic ended, Conservative ministers chose to make that switch to phone assessments permanent. So last year, just 5% of PIP assessments were face-to-face. I think that was a massive mistake. The Conservative policy opened the door to error, abuse and fraud. Unintentionally, yes, but poor Conservative policymaking incentivised fraud. And I strongly suspect that that huge Conservative mistake is one of the main reasons the welfare bill has ballooned and why public trust in the system has been undermined. We must go back to face-to-face assessments as soon as possible so those who need support get it, and those who don't. And of course, we need to invest in people's health, physical and mental health, to get the welfare bill down and more people back into work. How can we rebuild the economy when more than 6 million people are stuck on NHS waiting lists? How can we grow the economy when 2.8 million people are shut out of the labour market by long-term illness? When people are waiting weeks for a GP appointment? A healthy economy needs a healthy population and a healthy NHS. So, Liberal Democrat campaigns on GPs and dentists and hospitals and social care are about giving people the health care they deserve, but they are also core to our economic vision too. And while we're thinking about people, let me turn to the cost of living crisis people are facing right now, and the number one thing driving it, energy bills. With inflation rising to 3.6 last month, this needs tackling urgently. Families and pensioners are being clobbered with energy bills that are still more than £50 a month higher than they were 5 years ago. So many people who were already struggling to make ends meet, having to find an extra £50 a month just to keep the lights on or keep their homes warmer this winter. And businesses are suffering too. Even with the welcome extra help promised in the new industrial strategy, parts of British industry will continue to face some of the highest electricity prices in the OECD. We have to get those prices down to boost living standards and grow our economy. A big part of that are the things Liberal Democrats have consistently championed. Generating far more electricity from cheap, clean, renewable sources, solar, wind, tidal, hydroelectric. Insulating people's homes and making them more energy efficient so they are much cheaper to heat. Things the Liberal Democrats have a great track record on in government. Things the Conservatives put into reverse after 2015. And when it comes to home insulation especially, something I'm afraid this Labour government simply hasn't made enough of a priority so far. But there's another part of the problem that we haven't spoken enough about that I want to address today. And that's the narrative seized upon by Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch that says the reason energy bills are so high is that we're investing too much in renewable power. And if we just stopped that investment and relied more on oil and gas instead, bills would magically come down for everyone. Well, the experience of record high gas prices in recent years shows that's not true. And even when gas prices are softer, the long history of volatility in fossil fuel prices means it's only a matter of time before high prices return. So we know that tying ourselves ever more to fossil fuels would only benefit foreign dictators like Vladimir Putin, which is probably why Farage is so keen on it. I think we also have to be honest and admit that we have done a really bad job winning that argument. Those of us who understand how important renewable energy is for our economy, how only renewable energy can deliver permanently low and secure energy prices today and in the future, have too readily dismissed the rantings of Farage. But refusing to engage hasn't stopped his myths from spreading, from gaining traction in the new world of fake news. So we must change that, starting with the kernel of truth that underpins the myth. People are currently paying too much for renewable energy, but not for the reasons Nigel Farage would have you believe. Because generating electricity from solar or wind is now significantly cheaper than gas, even when you factor in extra system costs for backup power when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. But people aren't seeing the benefit of cheap renewable power because wholesale electricity prices are still tied to the price of gas. Even though half of our electricity now comes from renewables compared to just 30% from gas. That's because the wholesale price is set by the most expensive fuel in the mix, and in the UK that's almost always gas. 97% of the time in 2021. The cost of electricity was set by the price of gas. And what does that mean for families, for pensioners and for businesses? It means we're all paying that higher price in our bills, even though most of the energy we're using comes from much cheaper renewable sources. Not only is that manifestly unfair, but it's also undermining public support for the investment we need in renewable power. When people don't see the benefits of cheap, clean energy in their bills, we shouldn't be surprised if they're sceptical about building more of it. So we have got to break the link between gas prices and electricity costs. We have to. Now, it's something both the Conservative government and now Labour have spoken about. But when it came to it, both of them put it in the too difficult drawer and just left the problem to fester. So, as with social care, as with sewage, it falls to us, the Liberal Democrats, to say it might be difficult, but we have to do it. We can't afford not to. Not when the price is Nigel Farage. Now, this happens to be a problem we've grappled with before, that I grappled with before back when we were in government. It was part of the thinking behind the incentive mechanism we created for new renewable projects, contracts for difference. These contracts give energy companies the certainty they need to invest in renewables. If the wholesale price drops below the agreed strike price in the contract, the government pays them the difference. But crucially, they give consumers a fair deal too. If the wholesale price goes above the strike price, like they did when gas prices soared when Russia invaded Ukraine, energy companies pay back the difference, taking money off household energy bills. If all renewables were on contracts for difference, the electricity market would be a lot fairer and people would see the benefits of cheap renewables in their bills when gas prices are high. The problem is, only about 15% of renewable power is generated under contracts for difference. The rest is still governed by the old Renewables Obligation Certificate Schemes, or ROCs, introduced by the last Labour government all the way back in 2002, where ministers didn't have the foresight to realise that renewable power would get so much cheaper over the next 2 decades. Unlike contracts for difference, companies with ROCs get paid the wholesale price, in other words, the price of gas, with a subsidy on top. Subsidies paid through levies on our energy bills, costing a typical household around £90 a year. It shouldn't be this way, and it doesn't have to be any longer. The government should start today a rapid process of moving all those old ROC renewable projects onto new contracts for difference. It's an idea from academics at the UK Energy Research Centre that they call Pot Zero. In 2022, they estimated that it could save around £15 billion a year. Not only encouraging the end of those old renewable obligation certificate levies, but in the process cutting the typical household energy bill by more than £200 a year. So my challenge to ministers is this: if you want to bring people's energy bills down, if you want to tackle the cost of living, if you want to build support for renewable power, stop tinkering, stop dithering, stop deliberating, start phasing out those unfair renewable obligation certificate schemes today by offering instead new contracts for difference we Liberal Democrats brought in. Our incentive scheme is there. We created it. Please use it. One simple trick to save everyone at least £200 a year. And there are so many ways we could do more to cut electricity bills for people and businesses over the next decade. One example: why aren't we pushing much harder for more interconnectors, cables that allow us to import electricity from Europe when it's more expensive here and export electrons when it's more expensive there? Of course, Brexit was bad news for this trade, for both existing interconnectors and worse news for new projects. But one potentially big benefit for the UK rejoining the EU's internal energy market is greater cross-border trade in power, and so lower electricity bills for consumers. After nearly a decade of criminally negligent energy policies under the Conservatives that pushed up everyone's bills, I believe the right policies now would cut energy bills in half, at least, within 10 years. That should be the goal, nothing less. A Liberal Democrat energy policy in service of the British people, not a Nigel Farage energy policy in service of Vladimir Putin. So just imagine what our economy could look like in the next decade or so. Energy bills slashed, easing the pressure on families and businesses. People helped into work instead of trapped on NHS waiting lists or discarded as inactive. Education and training to equip people with the skills for the future. British startups and scale-ups thriving with the support they need. Entrepreneurs and the self-employed recognised for the risk they take. Trade boosted, especially with our neighbours in Europe. The public finances carefully managed and properly scrutinised in Parliament. And a supercomputer or two, hopefully not putting think tanks out of business. An economy growing strongly where everyone feels the benefits, everyone. An economy underpinned by our proud Liberal Democrat values, proud British values. An economy that is truly innovative, dynamic, prosperous and fair. That is our vision, and I can't wait to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is that working now? Hi. Hello, everybody. Thank you for that. That was great to hear such a wide-ranging and forward-facing view of the economy. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions to get the conversation started, and then we'll open it up to the floor. So I should probably, given where you started your speech, I should probably confess that I started my career as a Treasury official. But as a result, I'm deeply invested in getting the processes of budgets and fiscal policy right. I'm conscious that for ordinary people, these conversations about process can feel rather sort of esoteric and abstract. So I wonder whether you could talk a little bit more about how, in practical ways, you think those sorts of changes could actually improve the way government makes and delivers policy.
Well, here's a little secret from my time as a minister. They never told you what was in your budget. And when you asked, they looked, why are you asking about what's in your budget, Minister? And the reason is you never had to go to Parliament to defend it. The only time I got really asked by officials what did I want to spend was at the end of the year, when they said, oh, Minister, we're underspend on our £6 billion programme by £10 million. How would you like to spend that £10 million, Minister? Which was nice of them. But I wanted to know how to do the £6 billion. I wanted to be held accountable for it. So that's the truth. The way Whitehall works with ministers is that ministers actually, because they don't have to answer in Parliament, don't really get to grips with their budget. And that may be liked by Treasury officials, but, you know, I don't think it's good for our democracy. It's why I gave the example of Sweden. You know, Sweden, no one thinks that Sweden treats people unfairly or is not a prosperous economy or a much fairer society than ours, but they got their processes right when they were in a crisis, and look, they got their debt down despite continuing to grow and be a fair society. So I think holding minister account properly is absolutely the way to go. And you know, I actually raised this when I was in Cabinet. I got a few of the Conservative ministers quite excited, and they set up a little working group, and it was all, you know, frisson, oh, maybe we've got something here. And it went to the Treasury. And George Osborne said no, but for no reason at all. So we have to break this. It's a real reform. And I think if I was in the Treasury and I'd look abroad to what other countries do, I would really welcome this. I've written a pamphlet about it. It was published 25 years ago.
Good to see some consistency over a long period on the argument. You talked about winning the argument for clean energy. Obviously, that argument has to be won nationally, but it also has to be won locally. So, you know, new energy infrastructure is built in places, in people's communities, in the places where they spend their time. So I wonder whether you could say a little bit more about how you've talked a lot about, obviously, the potential to bring down people's bills, which is one part of that argument. But could you talk a little bit more about how you square that circle, perhaps, between what's in the national interest and what people might want locally or not want locally?
Well, it's really interesting when you look at the opinion polls about different forms of renewable power, including when you poll people who live in an area that's about to get some renewable power. There's a lot more support for it than you'd expect. Renewable power is actually the most popular form of energy, even when people have renewable power installations in their area. But you get quite a lot of noisy people, understandably, right? Their voices should be heard and looked at in the planning system, and not against that. But first of all, my first answer to your question is, I don't think we should be worried about this. I think we can take people with us. And one of the things we did in government, I'm afraid it sort of lost its way during the Conservative years, is work out how communities can benefit from energy, renewable energy in their area. And there's lots of examples. We manage it in a number of areas. And I think if people could see there's something in it for them, as well as it doing the right thing, I think you'd get a lot more communities saying, yeah, bring it here. And third thing is the community energy idea. I was a huge advocate of community energy, and I think it's one of the ways where you can buy people into this new form of power and get people really excited about it.
Great. I'm going to take some questions first from colleagues from the media, and then I will open it out to the wider audience as well. So, yes, here on the aisle. Yes, you.
Hi, it's Peter Walker from the Guardian. It was quite a wide-ranging speech, and it had quite a lot of quite technical terms in it. I mean, let me remind myself of what some of them were. You had office of the taxpayer, employment in a box, contracts for difference. I mean, this is all very kind of interesting stuff. But if you're taking on populists on the right, do you think that kind of stuff is going to get across to voters? And if I can cheekily ask a second one, what did you make of the leader of the opposition saying through a spokesperson that she didn't attend the security briefing, which would have told her about this secret Afghan scheme, because she didn't have the time to do it?
I'll take a couple of questions and then we can answer them together. Yes, over here.
Hi, Zoe Crowther from Politics Home. I did want to ask you about Keir Starmer suspending the whip from 4 MPs this afternoon, and he's also taken away 3 trade envoy roles from 3 others, apparently for persistent knobheadery. Do you think this is good leadership by Keir Starmer? And would the Lib Dems welcome any of these MPs to defect to the Lib Dems if they should wish?
And then one more on the aisle there, and then we'll come back to you.
Harry Farley from BBC News, said, are you guilty slightly of indulging in your position of leader of the third party and criticising all those around you and not facing up to some of the difficult decisions in government? And can I put to you one of those difficult decisions? The Chancellor faces a black hole of up to around £20 billion this autumn. If you were in government, which taxes would you put up to raise that money, or would you cut spending, and if so, in which areas?
We'll come back to you. There's plenty to be getting on with there.
Peter, when you write your headlines, say Liberal Democrats want to take to cut your energy bills in half. I think people can understand that. There's a bit of geekery. We're in a think tank, but the headline is we're going to cut your energy bills in half, and in this Parliament by at least £200. And I think that is what we need to say to people. The truth is Nigel Farage has no answers, right? Nigel Farage will tell you about all the problems, but when you ask him about his answers, he's just got nothing to say. I mean, he just says, in this area, well, more gas. Well, gas is the problem, right? Gas is the problem. And I think it's really important. I know the Guardian aren't guilty of this, but I was calling out the BBC earlier. We've got to hold these people to account for getting away with their snake oil sales pitches. So we will go with the headlines, but the difference with us is we have thought through the policies underneath the headlines too, which why people can bank on them. They can't bank on anything that man says. The security briefing, I think they should offer security briefings to the real leader of the opposition, myself. I mean, they sometimes do. They didn't today. I think it was dereliction of duty, actually. And with the Conservatives clearly guilty of some serious mistakes with respect to those Afghan families and people who helped our soldiers. Maybe that's why she didn't want to hear the truth. Who knows? Zoe, listen up. End of the first year, we're seeing a government with a huge majority having to massively change its reform proposals because of massive division on its backbenchers. We're now seeing some of the things you talked about today. It's not a good look. There's a lot of division there. There's not strong leadership. It looks a bit chaotic. And there's a danger if it continues. It'll be like continuity Sunak. Can you remember what Sunak was like in the dying days of the last Conservative? People voted for change, and this isn't providing the change. It's not strong. And we do not want to go back to Sunak. Difficult decisions. I think that's, if you look at our record in the general election, we were the only party who set out taxes that would go up. I mean, I lose count of the times that I set out the fact that we think the banks have made huge profits, the big banks. And if we return the taxation of banks to what it was in 2016, because it's always cut taxes to the big banks by quite a large amount, you'd raise more than £4 billion a year, for example. We've argued that social media giants are undertaxed. I don't think we should kowtow to the Americans. If they have their service coming to here, they should pay their way. So the digital services tax should be increased. And if you look in our manifesto, I think we were the only party, the mainstream parties, setting out a fully costed program. So I'm afraid I don't buy the assumption behind your question.
Thank you. We've got time for a few more questions. I can take a couple more from media colleagues and then I'll open it out more widely. Yes, just here in the third row.
James Walcott from Bloomberg. You talked about standing up to Donald Trump and forging closer ties with the EU. The EU are currently looking at a 30% tariff if they don't get a trade deal. Would you want that for Britain too, if you want to be part of the EU?
And then I think there was one question just at the back here on the left. And then I will come to the wider audience next.
Thanks. Adam Cherry, GB News. Lots of mentions of Nigel Farage and reform today. Do you consider them your main opposition? Are you panicking about them like the Labour Party appears to be?
James, thing about Donald Trump and his tariff, he's the hokey coke, isn't he? I mean, people don't even believe in Wall Street what's going to happen. And I think that's sort of backs up our approach, that you've just got to be tougher. You've got to think about long-term trade policy. And there is no doubt that our long-term future as an economy is linked to the economies in Europe far more closely than anywhere else. And we need to sort out those trade barriers. I mean, Conservatives should hold their heads in shame for what they did to our economy. I mean, there's some estimates that we've lost up to 5% of national income thanks to what they did to our economy. And those sorts of numbers put the sort of trade deals that Mr. Starmer has agreed with, but not just with President Trump, if he's agreed a trade deal, because we don't quite know if it's agreed yet, and it's not law, so who knows what we've agreed. But if you add in the India deal, which is quite a minnow of a deal, really. I mean, the amount we're talking about getting back for our economy and the prices being lower through a UK-EU customs union is so much bigger. So I'm afraid I just deal in sort of the facts as opposed to the sort of hype of that we see in some parts of this discussion. I'm certainly not afraid of Nigel Farage. He has to be taken on, though. I think he's a danger to our country. And I think he keeps misleading people. And on this agenda, I've just shown out precisely how he's misled it. And people need to call him out. There are people who are going to vote for him thinking that he's telling the truth. And we know he's not. The facts are clear. So Liberal Democrats are going to take them on. And by the way, we are taking them on the ground. We won a seat off them in a council by-election in County Durham a few weeks ago. Really proud of that. So we are going to take on reform. But we're going to take on Labour too. I'm going to take on the Conservatives too. And the Nats. We had a surprising result. Well, some of you were surprised a year ago. I think you're going to be surprised how well we do in the future.
Great. I can see there are lots of people who want to ask questions, so if I can ask people to keep their questions brief, and please do say very briefly who you are before you ask. So my colleague's got a microphone there. So yes, there's a couple over this side. Yeah.
Thanks, from the New Economics Foundation. Just building on your point about taxes, I wonder if you had a view, or the Lib Dems have a view about what you'll do in the long term, because the OBR's long-term projection suggests that by 2050, the cost of running public services goes to about 60% of GDP. The tax base as it stands would raise just about 40% of GDP, leaving a sort of 20 percentage point gap. What would you, do you have a sense, is it about changing the tax system to raise that, to close that gap, or changing what we might expect from the state over the next 25 years? Do you have a sense of what you'd do, or both?
Great. And there are a couple more questions over here, so we'll...
Convenient seating. Hi, Joseph Gelman from de Havilland. I'll ask this question of personal interest. One allegation often made about the Liberal Democrats is that they have a NIMBY tendency, fairly or unfairly. One example, which comes up sometimes thinking about energy, is opposition to reservoirs. That's happened in the past. How would you defend against these allegations of NIMBYism? And how do you think, well, how would you take on those perhaps at a more local level who may oppose clean energy infrastructure in the area from within your party, so councillors and MPs, for example?
Great. And then one more, just a couple of rows in front, and then I'll come to this side on the next round.
Brian Matthew, Member of Parliament for Melksham and Devizes. Ed.
It's better be a simple one, right?
Yeah, no, it is, I promise you. There's an ism that says that those who trade together don't fight against each other. And I'm wondering if there isn't a peace dividend with this as well, with all this talk of war that seems to be floating around.
Yeah, Danny, and by the way, huge supporter of NEF. I think you do a great job. Well, first of all, and this is, I will direct myself to the question, but I do think growing the economy is the most important thing that we face. As soon as you start growing the economy, all these things, they suddenly become a lot easier. But at the moment we've got low growth and relatively high interest rates, well, at least for recent years. And that's really challenging when you've got the debts we've got. So if you're in the Treasury, your former friends in the Treasury, you're finding it really tough. And you're coming out, if you're the OBR, with these really scary numbers. I have to say, having been around the national economic debate for about 30 years myself, I've seen scary numbers before, and then they sort of get less scary when things are going well. So our focus needs to be on growing the economy. That's why we're talking about trade. It's why we're talking about incentives. It's why we're talking about the things we are doing. But you make a point. I'm not sure if the OBR takes account of the climate change committee's concerns about how things are going to change, because they're saying that the cost of going green is going to be more expensive. But when you look at their numbers, more than half of the cost of it is that people by driving electric vehicles won't be paying fuel duty, right? And I think lots of people who are driving might say, oh, isn't it great when it pays so much taxes? The question is, we'll need to debate that. Of course we'll need to debate that. And we need to debate it as a society properly. And at the heart of what I said today is trying to make that debate better. Because the debate happens within the Treasury, and occasionally they come and tell us what they're thinking and their conclusions if they deign to. If we want a proper national debate, let's have it in Parliament. Let's have the alternatives. Let's vote on those alternatives. You can do that. Other countries do it. We're one of the worst for allowing our Parliament to have a say on these issues. And when we're faced with those difficult ones, that is the way to do it. If you get the process right, as Sweden shows, you can come up with a really good result. Right, NIMBY. Well, first of all, it's not true. For example, I have colleagues from Cambridgeshire here. We're supporting the new reservoir in Fens. So there's an example where we're actually supporting it, and indeed we're calling on for a stronger water strategy for Cambridgeshire. Local renewable energy plants. You go to a place like Eastleigh, they're building their own solar farms. So, I had this discussion in the general election with on two media things, and every example they gave, I gave an example back. Liberal Democrats are doing well in getting infrastructure, but I think if you do a proper comparison, you see we've got a better record than most other parties. But going back to the answer to my question, if you can take communities with you, that's a better way of doing things. And if you can show that there's something in it for them, whatever you're building, you'll take them with you. My experience in my own constituency and working with colleagues elsewhere is that approach gets things built quicker and more cheaply, but you have to involve the local people and those people affected and make sure that they can see that there's something in it for them, which I think is a reasonable approach. Brian, thank you. That wasn't the googly that I was thinking. I think the case for trade, of course, is linked to peace. The case for Europe is about prosperity and peace. The two absolutely do come together, and that's why our party for 200 plus years has advocated it.
If Ed will indulge us in running over just 5 minutes, I'll take one more quick round of questions. So I'll take one in the front row here and then one further back. Any women want to ask a question? Please go ahead.
Thank you. Cameron Thomas, Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament for Tewkesbury. Ed, twice you mentioned Nigel Farage's name in the same sentence as Vladimir Putin's. You'll know that Nigel Farage has spoken of his admiration for Vladimir Putin and in fact met the Russian ambassador ahead of the Brexit referendum. But to what extent do you think the UK voting public recognises the alignment between what Nigel Farage is selling and what Vladimir Putin wants us to buy?
And then one more in the middle of this block towards the back. Gentleman with the glasses. Great. It's
Hello.
on. Great.
I've got a loud Glasgow accent anyway, so it does carry. But, my name's Heather Mackay. I lead the Sustainable Finance Programme at E3G, which is a think tank. And I wanted to go back to your point about the net zero question and it having gone from a place of party consensus to a lot of division. And what role do you think your party and yourself can play in helping rebuild that confidence in that net zero is a great thing for the UK to do?
Great. And there was a question right next to you, I think. And then...
Oh, is this on?
Yep.
Yeah. Joe Wright, Tax Justice UK. There was a pretty savage report, as select committee reports go, from the Public Accounts Committee today showing that HMRC has no idea how much tax billionaires pay and no idea how much they should be paying. So what will the Lib Dems do to tackle tax abuse by the wealthiest and most powerful?
Thank you. Cameron, first of all, I think some people are aware of Farage saying that Putin is the world leader he most admired, and some of them may have put two and two together, but I don't think anywhere near enough have. And I think it's our job to call that out and to explain to people that Nigel Farage seems to like these unusual foreign leaders, including Donald Trump. I mean, he is the Trump champion, isn't he? And I think even if you poll Reform voters and they know about Farage's like of Putin or like of Trump, it does not go down well. So one of the ways we take on Nigel Farage is by exposing the truth about him and his mates. And I think we can persuade people not to vote for him, and that's one of the ways we can win and stop this danger to our country. Heather, I mean, to win the argument on net zero and on all these policies, you've got to show that it will lower people's bills. And that's what I was doing today. If you get this right, you can lower people's bills. When we were doing contracts for difference, I remember so many articles saying, oh, it's going to be so expensive, it's not going to work. And guess what? It worked even better than I was arguing. It just brought the prices of renewable power down. And that can happen again and again. You're seeing it you saw it with solar, the cost of solar plummeting. You're seeing it with batteries, the cost of batteries plummeting. That is the reality. And I think those of us who support this new technology need to talk about its benefits. And it's not just about lower energy bills. Well, that's obviously really important in the cost of living crisis. It's about the growth that isn't just in the southeast. The great thing about renewable jobs, they are everywhere in our United Kingdom. Every nation, every region, and can create really high-skilled jobs in loads of places. So I think we should really get on the front foot. I'm even prepared to say that the current Secretary of State, Ed Miliband, is doing a good job in some areas. So I'm happy to try to be as cross-party as possible. But our job in opposition is to call it out where it's not going far enough, and that's really what we're doing today. I haven't read the PAC report. I could see two of my colleagues who are members of the Public Accounts Committee nodding their head and agreeing. So you're clearly telling the truth in your question. I would almost want to defer to my colleagues who've actually read the report about how you do. But the overall point of your question is, should we stop this abuse? And the answer is absolutely yes.
Brilliant, thank you. Look, from IPPR, thank you so much for coming and giving so generously of your time for questions, but also for a really thought-provoking and interesting speech, because, I mean, many of these issues you will be pleased to hear IPPR has lots of active work on, so we're looking forward to continuing the conversation with you and helping to provide at least some of the answers to some of the really important questions you've posed today. I think the good news is there are some drinks available down the hall for those who've got time to stay and continue the conversation there. But from me as chair of this event, please thank you to all of you for your attention and for brilliant questions. And we look forward to continuing the conversation about these issues as IPPR in the years to come. Thank you again.